More. Where in the hell are they? They're still sleeping. Good morning, everyone. My name is BettyAnn Z, and I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon. And my home group is the Tradition 5 group in Woodland Hills that meets on Friday nights. And also we have a Tradition 5 Al-Anon parent focus group that meets on Monday nights in Westlake Village, California. I'm right over the hill from Malibu, where my other meeting is Monday morning Malibu meeting, and it's the Shishi group. They even allow emotional health dogs, like me. But anyway, I don't know what the hell Al-Anon's coming to. I swear to God. You know, we used to drag in our husbands drunk. Now we're dragging in animals. Or, you know, remember the old adult children thing? They drag in dolls or teddy bears or something like that. But anyway, I am not Mary Pearl. Close. No, but God bless her. God bless her and her family. They've had a terrible year this year and a lot of loss. And one of the graces of the program is that I've been able to grow up with, or they've been able to grow up with me since I have a little bit more time. But you know, we've been able to grow up with women in this fellowship throughout AA and Al-Anon, throughout this fellowship and thing, that led us and guided us, you know, through the disease of alcoholism, but really the disease of Al-Anonism. I really want to thank Debbie. I was her fourth choice, and I know she's on the phone going, oh my God, we just have her. Oh my God, you know. That's true. No, anyway, you know, I met her. All right, get out your hankies. I met her a year and a half ago. We were invited, Bob and I, who I forced to make a free decision, to get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, or else I was going to take him for everything he had or everything he dreamed he would have or everything that I thought he had. And my husband is sober today in Alcoholics Anonymous, 36 years, just celebrated it in the Pacific group. Clancy's his sponsor. Clancy's not my sponsor. And and I attend the Pacific group occasionally when my husband takes a birthday or one of the people that he sponsors takes a birthday. Or women in this room is Sharon. Who, like Deb and Al-Anon, who are the women that will probably save my daughter's life. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning, because Sharon and I'm the good Al-Anon. I brought all the materials. And but I want to thank Deb and the Al-Anons that are here and that always take a risk and always roll those dice, you know, because I come from, I was born in Chicago, and my grandparents lived up in northern Wisconsin between Rylander and Crandon. It was called Little Rice Lake, and there were a bunch of hillbillies. And they all immigrated, you know, from Kentucky in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they homesteaded that land up there, about 1,000 acres. And so this is really home to me, to be able to come home to Wisconsin, to be able to go to Chicago, have somebody tomorrow is taking me, I don't know who it is, Debbie had to pay him a lot of money, take me. Because this conference has given me the privilege of being able to be here. And that's what it says in Al-Anon. It's a privilege to be part of the program. It's a privilege. It's not a right. It's a privilege to belong to the part of Al-Anon. And it's also a privilege for me to be in the company of women, God-spirited women, which is good orderly direction in my life, because I didn't believe in a God when I came here. And because of Debbie taking that risk and rolling the dice. I don't know if a lot of you know Bo Templeton. And years ago, he has this pair of dice. And always take a gamble. And you roll the dice, and every part of the die comes up God. Al-Anon and Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon are three fellowships within one, and Lois Wilson told us that. told me that personally. It's 3 fellowships within one. And she told the trustees in New York at Bill Wilson's dinner, don't ever forget that. After a 20-minute ovation of her staying there. I had the privilege of being with Lois Wilson for the last 12 years of her life. I also had the privilege, and then because I live in Thousand Oaks, California, where Sharon talked about last night, about John, the town drunk's daughter, lived in Thousand Oaks. And because she was willing to go to any lengths for her sobriety and to help others and do a 12-step call and running there late, had a spiritual experience. Al-Anons have spiritual awakenings. We wake up. What do we wake up to? Oh my God. Yeah. We wake up. I heard a woman in Texas many years ago. This AA lady, she was great. She was a crotchety old broad, let me tell you. Where Al-Anons are, blue hair, thin lips, and all that, or goes opposite, blue lips and gray hair, whatever. Blue hair. I don't know. I don't care. But I can remember her telling these AA women, we were at this little conference in Brazos, and she said, you got to get up, honey. You got to stay up. You got to clean up. You got to shut up. I went, I'm glad I'm not an alcoholic. And I could take some good discipline. How many people are here for the first time? Oh, my gosh. Somebody must have really forced you to make a free decision. Welcome to Heart to Heart. Welcome to an experience that Deb talked about, and Barbara talked about last night. Welcome to an experience of women together in recovery, or maybe not, but anyway, it's the best thing to know is not to know. It's better to wonder than know. And when you came here last night, it's like when you went to your first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon. You walked into that meeting and you had the courage to do that. It takes a lot of courage to be in desperation as an alcoholic. It takes a lot of courage for an Al-Anon to force that person to make a free decision and to carry through that decision. That's why Al-Anons don't serve on jury duty. Because they insist that they're the guilty one. How much have you had to drink? Just a few. I know you haven't had a few. I wrote it down on the calendar. You were at Bell's Bar, and I know how much you were drinking. You were sitting with that blonde with the big boobs. Where in the hell were you? I was down at the end of the bar, sitting with that good-looking guy. No. Committed part of my 5th step. It takes a lot of courage to come in here this weekend. It takes a lot of courage to go through that snow. I left 80-degree weather in Los Angeles. I came a day early, thank God. I'd never made it through that turbulence. My God's kind of small. Anyway, I was praying for her because I was here saved. So it's okay to pray for her. One of the things about Sharon, I want to tell you a little bit about Sharon. Tell you a little bit about the example that not only is she given to my daughter and the women that are in her group, or women throughout the world, and she's given me hope. She gives me hope for what she went through, and she didn't tell all of it, what she went through to be able to get here. She didn't talk about the humiliation. She talked about the degradation, but she could remember. My daughter doesn't want to remember. That's why my daughter is still out there. My daughter is so, the new word, damaged. She cannot look at that 4th step. She cannot look and surrender to that 1st step. Sharon gives the example every Wednesday night and in her other meetings that she does. She overdoes it. I'm the Al-Anon of that type. I think she overdoes it. I think her relationship with her first husband, I watched her go through that. And that's a privilege. It's a privilege, Debbie, to be able to be asked to come to be able to be with women of strength, women of courage, women that have a mission. I don't know how many of you, work in the entertainment business and off and on, and there's a great movie out called The Way, Martin Sheen. I don't know if any of you have seen it. Wisconsin people, I know, are spiritual. I'm sure they saw it. That movie's about a pilgrimage. And I'm of the generation now, I'm my fourth generation for almost 40 years of Al-Anon. And that generation thing is to make the pilgrimage to Lois Wilson, to Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob. Now they have plays about Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson meeting. My name is Bill W. It's unbelievable how the fellowship. It said in 2000 that the fellowship thing, in Time magazine, when 2000 came, the millennium, it said that Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, and Alanon and 12-step programs are the greatest spiritual movement of the 20th century. How can we not feel privileged to be part of something that is the greatest movement of this? Just this little heart-to-heart with 100 women, and then the ones that didn't show up, that didn't have the courage to go through that snowstorm. I used to drive, 50 miles one way in Reno, outside of Reno, and to go to a meeting when there was 8 feet of snow. But to watch the courage of Sharon, to watch the courage of how raising her son. They think, they're circuit speakers, they fly all over, they go all over. Deb understands. She understands what it's like, to be on a pilgrimage, to be on a mission, to be able to be here with you. You give us more than we could ever give you. You 12-step us every time we go out. What a privilege to meet women and men throughout the world. What a privilege to have a connection in Thousand Oaks that connects you back to your town drunk, to your father who's a non-alcoholic, to give a book, to help someone to get sober, to do a 12-step call. A number of years later, Lois Wilson said in New Orleans, at the International Convention of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon and Alateen, she said it when she got up on the podium and she got everybody settled down. She made the most profound statement I've ever heard, and especially today, about all the politically correct crap to say. What does she say? How can anyone deny there's not a God? With 60,000 people there. How can anyone deny that? We're not on pedestals. We're not at podiums. We're not here. We're here because we're not all there. We're here because we're on a pilgrimage. We're on a mission to help each other. Just like the way that we're sitting. We touch each other. We played last night. We do all those things which make us know Al-Anon is alive and well. Alcoholics Anonymous women are alive and well. That whatever you came in here with this weekend, because I go to things that I'm not invited to. I was talking to Denise, my caretaker. Glad she had makeup. But anyway, I was talking to Denise, who came and picked me up and shared with me last night until midnight. I wouldn't let her sleep because I'm on California time. So I'm just, that's the 13th step of the Al-Anons. We just go on and on and on and on. But she was sharing with me a personal thing about the 11th step, which we're going to talk about today. She shared with me a few things that taught me some lessons. She shared with me to put my guard down. She shared with me that she would go to any lengths to be of service to me and to Al-Anon. She runs the intergroup office here. She doesn't run it. She should. But anyway, it's a volunteer situation. She's active in Al-Anon, active in the district, still active and plus she's a good parent, single parent to her kids. Her daughter's sober a year and a half. She gives me hope. 18 years old. So those are the people that make the pilgrimage and things for us to have the privilege and thing to be with you. This weekend is going to be an intimate weekend. We're going to share with you, and we're going to share with you our lives, Sharon and I. And I get to have the privilege and thing of sharing with you also what I've seen, what Sharon has done. I went to her husband's funeral last year, to the memorial. I got to tell you, it's one of the best memorials I've ever been to. I saw the strength. I saw the program behind her, but I also saw a woman of character. No more character defects, little liabilities. But I watched a woman get up there and not only be an example to her family and to Casey's family. Whereas 2 months ago, I went to one of our parents' son died of an overdose. And I watched his drunken wife with 3,000 people there from Thousand Oaks. He was a high school football player. Got a rehab. We have a little circle of upper middle class people in our area with a lot of disposable income. And their kids are all shooting up and drinking. And this kid overdosed on heroin, and the other kids and they took him in his house. One of my other parents coming to my meetings, took him in her house, left him there to die while they went out and partied some more. That's a disease of alcoholism. And I can see those 87 people in my parent meeting that are stunned. They can't accept that it's insanity, sobriety, or death. But I watch the dignity of Sharon. I watch the dignity of the group. I watched my husband cry. I heard my son-in-law in Reno cry for his golfing buddy. I did not see my father cry. I have a terrible story in regards to my family. And when Sharon talks about her family and her father, and when you talk about your family and your fathers and your mothers, I didn't come from that. I came from alcoholism in northern Wisconsin. I was a kid that, my father married, how much time do I have? 2 hours, 3 hours? Deb's like, oh, freak me out. I was born in Chicago. My dad was in the Air Force. We lived in a little trailer park across from Des Plaines. And Uncle Jack lived down 4 rows down with my Aunt Florence and my 4 cousins. My Uncle Jack died at 47 years old with an extended liver and jaundice, died of alcoholism. I liked my Uncle Jack. I was the little, caretaker, now that they call it. We lived in a little trailer. My dad would come home, and my mother was fabulous. They met in school. They had a one-room schoolhouse up in Crandon. And they used to, go through the snow and go to school. And they met, there was, 10 kids in the high school, grammar school, high school. Anyway, they met. My father, my grandparents my father comes from 9 children. My mother was the oldest of 12. And one of the reasons I got married the first time is because I wanted to change my name. And it was Yoakum. Well, one of my cousins is a kind of a famous hillbilly singer, right? Well, they call them country western singers now. He could use the program. But anyway, shouldn't have changed my name. And he doesn't share, though. And my parents loved each other. I didn't find that out, and I didn't find that really out until I did the steps with my sponsor, because I had a lot of resentment toward my father. It took me a number of years in Al-Anon to be able to, and another saving grace was going to open AA meetings. And also another saving grace was I read the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And by reading the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, as an Al-Anon, when I read that book and then I understood that I didn't understand. I still don't understand the disease of alcoholism. But I got a pretty good page out of it. I got a lot of wealth out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not conference approved literature and thing for Al-Anons, and especially in the West Coast, they want to fight over everything. And But on the third Friday of the month, when we have a speaker meeting, we have when Al-Anons drag in their husbands or our guys, we have a third of our meeting of 120 people, 125 people are men and in our group. So we have a very diversified group at Tradition 5 group. So if you're ever in Woodland Hills, ever in the Los Angeles area, please call me. Please come over and stay with us, visit us, and come over to my meeting. We'll make you a 10-minute speaker. If you're good. And but anyway, my parents are in love, and they decided, like their other sisters and brothers, that they needed to go to Chicago to make money to send home to take care of their parents, because they lived off the parents. My grandparents lived off the land there in Little Rice Lake. I loved it during the summers, and I just realized about 10 years ago that they'd take me up there for the summers, and then leave me there for the summers. And it was really strange because all my cousins would, be around, and then all of a sudden they'd leave for the summer, and I'd be up there alone. It's one of the things it says in Al-Anon. We feel unwanted, unloved, and alone. One of the greatest gifts that Al-Anon has for us is that all of our literature is written by us. That's why it's called conference-proof literature. It's not written by outside sources. And if you're an Al-Anon of my type here in the room today, you know that one piece of literature is written by Father Kellerman. Alcoholism, the merry-go-round called denial. But anyway, to make that story short, so I don't go on for a couple hours, is that, it was a very turbulent relationship my mother and father had. They loved each other a lot. My dad would come home from the base, and he'd go to that local bar, and I knew how much it upset my mother. We lived in a little trailer, and like I said, in the trailer park, and everything was going on in the trailer park and with the drinking and my father's drinking. And this one night, I didn't know this either, secrets, a lot of secrets in families, as you all know, a lot of secrets. And so my mother was pregnant with twin boys, but of course they didn't know it at that time. So I remember coming home from school, and they weren't there, and they call them now latchkey kids. Well, I just came home, you're alone, that's it, And I made a little dinner. I was 6 years old, almost 7 years old, and I was making a little dinner and cleaning up or whatever, waiting for my mother to come home and my dad to come home, and he didn't come home because the night before, I can remember in that little trailer, my dad got really upset with my mother. She was like a pre-Al-Anon, really. I remember her crying and asking him, please, John, don't go to the bar tonight. Please stay home. I didn't realize till, years later when my aunts told me that she was pregnant and she had some fear in her life. Fear. She had some fear in her life that something was going to happen with her and these babies. So she asked my father, please don't go to the bar at night. And my father, of course, is the alcoholic that he was, and what he did is he fought with her, and he was going to go to the bar, and she had the dinner ready, and he finally struck her. That was the only time I ever saw my father strike my mother, because he wanted to go to that bar, and she was standing in his way. It didn't make any difference what she said, and Al-Anons can agree with that. Even alcoholics can see that. Through your parents' eyes or through your loved one's eyes or whatever, you see that fear that we have. Sharon talked about that last night. But anyway, he did go to the bar, but he struck her first, and she slid down the side of the wall. My mother was like about 5'4", and of course big and pregnant, and she had a bloody nose. And he went to the bar, and she sat there. And I saw something in there with my mother that night that is resonated with me throughout my program, throughout my life. I saw, the hopelessness, the helplessness, but I also saw that my mother was humiliated by that. She was humiliated that she put herself in a situation that my father would have to hit her because she loved him so much. I think my mother knew, but she was in fear. So she asked me, and she was humiliated by that, because I've never known anyone to say, well, geez, I didn't say it. Well, Bob is so wonderful, I think I'll go to Al-Anon, And Bob didn't wake up one morning and go, geez, BettyAnn's such great, I think I'll go to Alcoholics Anonymous, And my mother said something to me, I'll never forget it. BettyAnn, I love you so much, but would you please go get Poppy and get Dad out of the bar and bring him home? I really need him tonight. And I thought, this is great, you know. I was pissed. I was resentful. I was angry, as it says in Al-Anon. I went over to the bar, the corner bar. My dad was, of course, playing shuffleboard. I saw it downstairs. Only in Wisconsin do they have shuffleboard tables. And I saw that downstairs, and I swear to God, last night when I saw that shuffleboard, I stopped in the middle of my tracks. And I said, you know what, God, you got me here for a reason. You got me here for a reason to remember. You know, they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, never to forget your last drunk. They say in Al-Anon, never forget your last slip. And the slip, what it is, you know, is nagging, scolding, bitching. Never forget the fear that raced through your heart. But my dad was playing the shuffleboard with a couple other people. And I remember, you know, trying to get that courage. You know, that's why I love this serenity prayer, the courage to go, you know, and tell him, you need to come home. Already I'm a little Al-Anon. You need to come home. Mom's in fear. You bloodied her nose. I really wanted to beat the crap out of him. But anyway, but I was afraid of my father. My father was 6'3", you know, he was in the Air Force. He was a very strong-willed man, and he was an alcoholic. So I went over to him and I said, Dad, you really got to come home. You know, Mom really needs you. And my father goes, no, he doesn't. He's got you. She's got you. And years later, that came back through me through the steps. Came back through me and then through the spiritual consciousness and the shift of consciousness that I had, is that, yeah, they have me. I can take care of this, right? But another thing of it is that I felt powerless, you know, with my father. I begged him. I tried to get him to come, and he still wouldn't come to help my mother. But he did something that an alcoholic does. He persuaded me to stay there and have a Coke. And that's where Al-Anon kicked in with me. I immediately surrendered to that. You know, I wanted to please him, and then I felt horrible about the way guilty. My husband always says, if you feel guilty, you are. And I felt guilty because I did not, you know, stand up for my mother. I did not have the power to bring him back into that trailer and to have him do the right thing with my mother. I stayed there, and I finally left, and I went back, and my mother I knew she wasn't asleep. But that was the last time I saw my mother. And thank you, Debbie. I felt the humiliation of that. I felt the powerlessness. And I remember laying on that little fold-out bed in the front of that little tiny trailer, and we were poor, and the next morning, my mother came up, and gave me a hug and kiss, and got me off to school. And there was no admonishment or anything like that. I remember putting her arms around me and telling me how much she loved me, that she'd see me tonight. You know, just like we put it out of our mind. You know, the next day, Al-Anon just put it out of their mind. But there's that seething fear and that, you know, and that within inside of us, and only the steps can work, in a sponsor that we trust and that we're safe with can heal us with that. And it takes time to heal those wounds. And now we call it damage, you know, or issues. I said the only issues I have is Oprah Magazine. No, I canceled that in my financial inventory. And but then that night when I came home, did my little routine, my mother never showed up. And that's the basis, I think, for all of us in the shift of consciousness in regards to the steps. You know, my mother never came home that night. And it was getting late, and I was getting back into fear. Where's Mom? You know, we didn't have cell phones, of course. We didn't have any of that. And finally, the people that owned the trailer park was named Adam and Eve. They were normies. And they owned this trailer park, and they saw what was going on in that trailer park. They saw my uncle drunk and all these other people drunk. And, you know, they say now that with the recession and the times, there's more alcoholism, there's more drinking, and, you know, there's more domestic violence. There's, you know, all sorts of things are going on during these times. Well, you know, it's every generation. Alcoholism doesn't have any respect or regard for us and for the families. Alcoholism doesn't have that. It's steady. It'll get you. Sharon talked about it last night. It's ready. It's waiting for you. And alcoholism is waiting for Al-Anons to intervene. Denise told me a really cute story about that, and I'll tell it later when we're doing the steps. But anyway, so Adam and Eve came over, and they said, BettyAnn, would you like to come over and have dinner with us? I see your parents aren't home. These are normie people that save our lives. These are normie people that see what's going on, because we're so close to the alcoholic. We're so close to the situation within our family, especially our families, like my mother-in-law, who I really loved in a very special way. It wasn't for you, he wouldn't drink. And if it wasn't for you, he wouldn't be here. But that night, I felt really guilty, and I went over there, and they had shrimp. I never had shrimp before. Oh my God, they fed me, and they were happy. Everybody was laughing, just like we do in the program. And I had some fellowship for maybe an hour. Then all of a sudden there was a knock on the door. It was my 3 aunts and my uncle, my 2 aunts and my uncle. And they came in and they said, you need to sit down, BettyAnn. And I sat down, and they told me that my mother, they had a party for her. And I couldn't figure out why they had a party for her. I found out years later from my twin aunts, her sisters, that they had a party for her because she was pregnant. And your mother, they had a party for her, and she was late, and she took another lady and dropped her off at the train station there in Des Plaines to catch a train to go to Chicago. And she said, what happened is that your mother went across the tracks, and another train hit her. And my mother was propelled against the telephone pole, and then this train hit her at 60 miles an hour. And my mother, was short and pregnant, 9 months pregnant, and she was propelled through the window, and they found her 100 feet away in a field. My mother died because of alcoholism, and she didn't drink. My twin brothers were killed instantly with her. I lost not only my twin brothers, but I lost a mother that protected me, that was my advocate. I lost a mother that showed me through her death that I didn't have to forgive my father for the abuse and for not sexual abuse, but for the physical abuse and the verbal abuse for many, many years. I had a mother that protected me and gave me, in 6.5 years of my life, gave me the strength to be the woman that I am today. And I know my mother would have loved this. She would have loved to have been in this room. She would have loved to be with you. Because all my aunts, they tell me, they said, oh my God, you're just like your mother. My middle daughter, Ambi, who, not an alcoholic, she was affected deeply by the disease of Al-Anonism. Because I did the things that Sharon did, and other alcoholic women that are in here. I can remember going to my sponsor, and I said, I don't think I can do that moral inventory. She goes, why? I said, well, I have a lot of, sexual history here in this 4th step. A lot of bad things, and I did a lot of bad things. And she goes, you know what, BettyAnn? Do an immoral inventory. She goes, because I want to read it. And that's the grace of the program. The grace of the program. We're not different. We're all the same. We all come in differently. We come in because we're humiliated by the disease of alcoholism. That changed my life, burying that mother, and especially from that big hillbilly family up north in Wisconsin. My father took me away And that's what alcoholics do. They take geographics. They take you away from your family. He took me away. He asked for a transfer to Sacramento. He married another woman that just died 2.5 years ago, my poor stepmother. And I say poor stepmother, and I'm not making any political excuses for it. She was an untreated Al-Anon. She had 5 children. I just lost, not only my stepmother to the disease of alcoholism because she became physically ill. That's how they tension. She didn't drive a car. And she didn't drive a car, because she was the only child of a Russian immigrant family from Chicago. She was 26 years old when she married my father. And when she died, she died a demented, mean, spirited, resentful woman of living with alcoholism. And at the end, she finally treated him she was horrible to him, verbally. And she did everything for him before that. Everything. And I can remember one time when I got into the program and I gave her all this literature of Al-Anon. And I said, Mom, you could really use this, And I can remember her throwing it into the fireplace and saying, it's too late for me. But you know what? My sponsor told me, BettyAnn, you didn't get here a minute too late or a minute too early. You got here right on time. I had to go through all of that, what I had to go through, and the pain and the misery of living with alcoholism and having that effects on my children, and then to be able to to be with you. I had to go through that. That's part of my character and my character defects and my shortcomings, and it's part of, my assets. I bring you my hopefully today, and you bring to me your assets and your pain that you've gone through of living with alcoholism. No matter who it is, whether they're dead or alive, whether they're insane, not insane, whether you're the caretaker of your parents or the caretaker of your husbands or your children. That's the gift that AA and Al-Anon gives us. It gives us that experience, that strength, that hope for us. That's what it gave to me because I was a lost child. I was a lost person. So my father moved me away from all my family. My grandparents, I found out later on, fought to have me to stay there in Chicago and Wisconsin. They offered my dad anything that I could stay there because I was the youngest of the cousins. And I could remember at the funeral, before they closed the casket, I don't know, I had this, Sharon talked about it last night. I had this spiritual intuition to say goodbye to my mother. And I can remember running up to the casket, and I was trying to climb into the casket. And I've had the privilege in Al-Anon to be able to sit at caskets of my sponsors. My 2 sponsors. I've only had 2 sponsors in Al-Anon, and they both have passed. Sally just passed 1.5 years ago. My sponsor, Sally Carpenter, who was my strength for the last 30 years. Who loved Alcoholics Anonymous. She loved an alcoholic. But I climbed in there, and I can remember my aunts, and my father said, get her out of there. But not my aunts. My aunts, they knew. Loving people. This is what she needs to do, John. She needs to do that. The dignity and the respect that my family gave me, this poor family who lost their sister. A family divided and then taken away from that family. So my first resentment was for my father and then for taking me away from my family. That I lost my family. My father got transferred to Sacramento. Didn't even have sidewalks, And I was crazed. I skipped 2 grades because in Chicago, we had a lot of homework, So I was in 8th grade. I was, 12 years old. I went to high school. I was 12 years old. I didn't shave my legs. I didn't, I had no mentors. I had no one. I was a comedian. I was, being a comedian, that's good, People don't beat the shit out of you, My father was transferred after my mother was killed, and we moved down to Harvey, Illinois. And we lived at the base down there in Harvey, Illinois. Rantoul. by the grace of God, a number of years ago, Rosie O'Donnell, and they took over that base and had put in low-income people and senior people and kids, and took over that base and wrote a book about it and saved a bunch of kids, a bunch of families. So all that wounds and all that, all that turmoil and all that alcoholism that went on in that base and in that neighborhood now is a neighborhood of peace. The next generation. Alcoholism is a generational illness. Al-Anon is too. And it carries through with us and carries through with us from generation to generation. Because the Al-Anons, we have children. And women, we have children. And our children are affected by our illness and by our disease. They love the alcoholic. They love the alcoholic. They love their, Sharon loved her father. She wanted to look eye to eye with her father. I could never have a conversation with my father. It was very brief. How are you doing? Not good. No. But anyway, so I skipped 2 grades. I ended up in high school, and there was this girl named Joyce Zimmerman, and she made me crazy, and made me really crazy. And they always teased me. I didn't know how to shave my legs or my arms or do all that, and I was a geek. That's what my son says. But anyway, what happened with that is that during that period of time in high school, I excelled in high school. Children of alcoholics, we either excel or become juvenile delinquents. I kind of became both. And my humor, would get me out of a lot of stuff, Plus, I was an athlete. I loved playing ball. I loved, doing that, so I could feel part of. But I never felt, I felt like the alcoholic did, I never felt part of. I was never part of the clique. I was never part of the group. And then there was something always different about me. And so what happened in high school is that once changed my life again. Another spiritual thing happened that really changed my life, which was really kind of a defect of character. But anyway, I was in high school, and this Joyce Zimmerman, she had big boobs, and she was older than I was, but she was in the same class. And we were at the locker. She always gave me a bad time at the locker. And this one day, she was in the locker next to me, and she gave me a bad time about something, and I think she hit me or something like that. And, I did that, what they call it, I guess, bipolar now or whatever. And anyway, I flipped out. I grabbed her, and I grabbed her by her long hair, and I should have grabbed the big boob. And anyway, I grabbed her, and I put her inside that locker, and I just beat the shit out of her with that locker. I mean, just so bipolar. That's why when I saw my daughter Ambi about 3 months ago, the neighbor, we got this neighbor up there in the ranch where I live at, and every time you park your car in front of his house, we didn't know this when we first moved in the house, but this old guy would come down and slash your tires or put the air out of your tires. And he did this one time to my daughter last year, and because she had her truck filled with recycled stuff or whatever. I guess he came down in the middle of the night, and my daughter flipped out, and she's not an alcoholic. She's whacked, But anyway, my daughter got into my garage and got the paint from the garage and went up there, and he's got this really nice mailbox. It's all bricks and, it's really in this mailbox in there. She took that paint and she, trashed that mailbox with all that paint. She's 44 years old. She's not affected, Little defect of character there. And the next day I'm driving out to go to my meeting, and I'm like, geez, something happened to their mailbox. He deserves that. And then when I came back, I saw the cops there. So I stopped and I went, I said, that's interesting. I said, that somebody did that. And they went, yeah, that's really interesting. This woman cop says to me, if there's any police women here, forgive me. But anyway, so she said, yeah. She says, do you know how this happened? And I said, no, I have no idea how it happened. I really didn't. And she goes, well, is that your truck down there? And I said, oh, no, that's my daughter's truck. She goes, well, you should go look at the steering wheel. I went, what? And I remember going looking at the steering wheel, and on the steering wheel was white paint. My daughter's car, and it was locked. And I remember that it struck me. It struck me as that, what character, what happened to me, that my daughter would flip out and go insane and do something like that. And I can remember going into, because she works for us in the guest house in the office, and I remember going in there, Amby, what happened? Don't get involved in it, Mom. Don't, I was pissed off. I said, the cops are out there. She goes, you go deal with it. You want to be involved in it, Mom? You go deal with it. And I can remember the disappointment and the hurt and the anger that I had. And then Al-Anon kicked in. I said, you know what, Amby, this is your deal. You got to take care of this. But I really recognized something this long in the program. My daughter is still deeply affected and having a non-program. And I can only be the attraction to her and to be the stable one for her. Because I could have done a lot of different things involved with that. Kicked her out of the house, or my granddaughter and the great-grand. I could have done a lot of things. I could have reacted to that. And Al-Anon has given me that gift. Well, I got to hurry up because otherwise I'll be here for another 2 hours. But anyway, so I was sent to the dean's office, and they had a dean of girls. She had this gray hair and put it into the back, and very strict. And I never get sent. You never get sent to the office. Went to the office, and I was just very fearful. And she looked at me and she said, "BettyAnn, this is kind of unusual for you to be, to do something like this, to be so violent with this Joyce, whatever." And I didn't, I didn't know what to say. I blurted it out. I said, "Please don't tell my father," because I know what he would have done, and wouldn't have been Joyce. But she goes, "I have another option for you," and that's what Al-Anon gives us. It gives us options. It gives us choices. Not only through the steps and the traditions, but through the concepts, which I use in my family. I use the concepts in my family now, and the traditions we've used for years, Bob and I have, for our family situation and our financial situation. But anyway, she said, I think I know what to do with you. I'm like, I'm glad somebody has a good idea. And I said, "What's that?" She goes, "I want you to join drama club." I said, "Really?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "I can't get into drama club. I tried anything, but, I wanted to audition, but they wouldn't take me. They said they were filled." She goes, "There'll be a spot for you in Mr. Graham's class." That's the first person that helped me. A teacher, a counselor. Thank God for that. If you're a teacher, if you're a counselor, you know who we are. You know to give us some dignity. You know where to put us. She put me in that drama class, and that was it. All over with. I loved that class. But then I had the disappointment of my father, which Sharon talked about. She didn't have that disappointment. But I did, where I'd wait for him to, "I'll take you to that, rehearsal. I'll take you to that play." And then he'd never show up. But you showed up for me in Al-Anon. When I was sick or I couldn't get to a meeting, you're the ones that would say, "We'll come pick you up," and they would come pick me up. I went through that and graduated, and I asked my stepmother, please do not have him come to my graduation drunk. He didn't come. He came to the graduation. He tried to hold it together. I see what alcoholism does. He tried to hold it together for that day. But I got nothing out of that. No college money, nothing. Everything was spent. He spent everything. A lot of resentment toward that. But when I graduated from high school, I graduated at 16. I got a job right away. And there was a lot of harassment that went on with that when I was a young girl. But then when I was 18 years old, and then I was, downtown Sacramento, I went through Mel's drive-through, a bunch of girls and I, and I met this guy who was a drinker, and I ended up marrying him, moving to Reno. And a year later, I married him when my dad was serving his last tour in Vietnam. And he came back, and I married this guy, Bob. Bob. I always marry Bobs. Keep the same name. But I went through Bob, and, and had 3 little girls. And then I found out that my mother, my aunts came to me, and she had a little policy that she'd written the night before from her insurance company where she worked at. And this policy she gave to my two aunts, and she says, I know John will have the money and anything to live on, but she said, there's a little insurance policy. I wanted you to give it to BettyAnn if she goes to college, or give it to her if she gets married, and so she can buy income property. My mother was a visionary. And but I was pissed when they gave me that money, because I was already married and had 2 children. I was pissed. But I did what my mother said. I bought some property in Reno with my husband, and when he wanted to move to Seattle, go to Boeing, I sold that property and bought another house up in Seattle. And it was very turbulent from then on for another relationship until 1969. And then I finally decided, and then, I was doing some entertainment in Seattle, and I decided in the middle of the night to take my 3 little girls. I was in a separation. Amby was only a year old, I think, at the time, and I just said, I got to get the heck out of Seattle. I did what the alcoholic did. I took a geographic, That's what I did, without a mentor, without a sponsor, without a program, without any direction, without parents, Meanwhile, my mother, my stepmother, my father, my 5 half-sisters and brothers, they're all in trouble. It's trouble. It's trouble in Sacramento. My parents have never helped me out, never sent a birthday card, a Christmas card, never been to any of my children's, births, graduations, nothing. But anyway, so a lot of resentment there, which we're going to talk about. But anyway, I got back, I picked out my kids that night, and put them in my little clown station wagon, because I had an entertainment business and was doing some television there. And I picked them up in the middle of the night, and I left my husband and left my kids 2 weeks before Christmas. And I can remember Kimberly, my oldest daughter, who is now in Al-Anon. She counts her Alateen time, 35 years, 36 years, and she's married to an alcoholic. And Tommy, who's the greatest gift that she could have had, really, who's sober in Alcoholics Anonymous many, many years. And I have 2 grandchildren by her. And I had a very turbulent relationship with my daughter over the years in Al-Anon. My daughter would hold me emotionally hostage by not speaking to me. She'd write me these dear adult child letters, and only because of Al-Anon and sponsorship through Sally were we able to really cross that bridge, and that I was able to look at my part in that through the 4th step. And I was able to try to be the best example and the best mom that I could possibly be without being held hostage for money, property, or prestige. I can remember when her father-in-law gave them $10,000 to buy a house up in Reno. And I remember looking at Bob and saying, well, why can't we do that? He says, because we overspend. We spend too much money doing all the things that we love to do. And he said, that's part of our selfish and self-centeredness, But they're normie people. They do normie things. See, I have Al-Anon drop-dead money. And, but anyway, so my life really changed after that. It really changed when I moved back to Reno, and I took my kids and took them out of school. I caused more harm. See, I'm starting to cause more amends, but I'm causing more harm. And my story is I get back to Reno, and I have expectations. And I have expectations of this friend of mine who had this nice house. I got her a job before I left Reno, working for the chamber. And so I remember going to her door. It was Christmas, a couple of days before Christmas, and it was snowing like it was here this weekend. And I can remember getting to the door with my 3 kids going, all the way from Seattle back to Reno, and going to the door and knocking on the door, and the kids got out of the car, and the cat, we lost the cat. Cats don't like to drive in cars. And but anyway, I don't like cats anyway. But no, nothing against cat people. And but anyway, I remember getting to the door and knocked on the door, and she came to the door, and she goes, "Oh, BettyAnn." And I could smell the Christmas tree, and I could smell the apple cider, and I can see her kids around the tree, and she had some family there. And I said, "Well, we're here." And she was going to give me a room and let me stay there for a couple weeks, and until I got on my feet and got a job. And she said, "You could go out there." I said, "Well, out where?" And she goes, "Out there." I can remember the humiliation I had with my kids. Out there was this old garage that she turned into I guess a guest house or whatever, and it had a king-size mattress in it, and that's it, and a heating thing, for the heat water on. and the toilet was outside. And I can remember the humiliation of that because I just left a beautiful home in Seattle that I used with my late mother's money. Had this beautiful home. I remember the degradation of the guilt that I felt of leaving that husband and leaving that situation because I couldn't face it. One of the women I sponsor, we always say in Al-Anon, fake it until you make it. And she goes, no, BettyAnn, it's called fake it until you have to face it. And I had to face that. I had to face the humiliation of my children, my 3 little girls, putting them into this garage, this cold garage in the middle of winter in December before Christmas. And trying to turn it around as an Al-Anon does. This is going to be a great adventure. And the humiliation of taking them back to Seattle to live with their father a year later because I couldn't be self-supporting. I couldn't take care of my children. But I had another clown partner and she was a drunk and I let her persuade me, take the kids back. They'll be better off with him. I didn't go. Years later, my children now my daughter's going to be 50 this year, and she said to me many years ago, her and Deanna, they said, Mom, you should have kept us. We could have made it. We could have made it because you had that strength to make it, Mom. We depended upon you to keep us together. And then my daughter came out of, my oldest daughter, Kimberly, got some help years ago, and she goes, Mom, you did more than your best. You did more than your best to protect us. We see the pain. I see the pain that you went through with your father and your family. And the abandonment, another new word, So again, if you're here this weekend with a lot of pain that you're bringing in here that's, causing you regret, this is where you leave it, like Deb said last night. This is where you leave it. And you trust the people around you. I don't know about those people with those crochet nickels. They don't allow that in California. And they don't allow a lot of things in California. But I went through a lot of degradation for the next 4 years till I met Bob. And then Bob and I got together, got rid of his ex-wives. My husband has a lot of ex-wives. And I only have a few minutes to tell you about the ex-wives. Well, no, forget it. But it's part of my story. And part of that story is that my husband's, when he's drinking, he's the marrying guy. He marries his high school sweetheart, and then they fought and had a couple kids, and so they got a divorce, and then, then he married somebody else, and who just served him all his drinks, and, and then he thought, well, this isn't it. So what he did is that he divorced her, and then he married the first one again. And that didn't work, so married the second one again. So I'm his 5th wife, I think. And I don't know if it's legal. You tell me when I gotta go, okay? She don't care. What the hell? She's stuck with me for the weekend, But anyway, so when I met him, he came into the bar where I was working at, because, Al-Anons work 2 or 3 jobs, and we always work in bars. It's great to work in bars, cocktail waitresses, bars, waitresses. Hey, you were a pretty good hobo waitress, whatever the hell it was. And, but anyway, he came in that bar with a blonde with big boobs and another lower companion. And, I went and served him 2, alcoholics are great. He ordered 2 drinks, I thought that's kind of unusual, not for Bob. Anyway, it was lust at first sight, and but I knew something was different about Bob. Yeah, it was a lot different. But there was something about me that attracted me to that. Mary Pearl always talks about, years ago, she always talks about, we have bad pickers. I don't think we have bad pickers. Lois Wilson and Ann Bingham didn't have a bad picker, and Ann Smith. They picked the right and perfect people, and they started the greatest spiritual movement of the 20th century. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here, because they forced them to make free decisions. We wouldn't be here. Anyway, it was a very turbulent affair, and we got rid of the wife. My husband had 3 kids, and we they would come into our restaurant. My husband had a 5-star restaurant, like a Spago's. Well, you don't know about that. You're not from LA, but you know Spago's, yeah. I mean, really, really nice 5-star restaurants. And we had a wonderful bar. Everybody drank there. The governor, the entertainers, everybody was there. And I worked for Harris in entertainment, so I came to work for him, which was ridiculous. Got rid of the wife, but you never get rid of ex-wives, especially in the Pacific Group. That's a really weird thing. They all become friends. Well, I'm an Al-Anon. I did not become friends with those two broads, but I did have to make amends to them, which we'll talk about later. But anyway, meanwhile, my children are in Seattle with my ex-husband. I'm with Bob in this turbulent relationship. I'm in this relationship with him, and he finally moves out of the second wife's old ladies' folks home, if you hear my husband's story. But anyway, I kind of forced him to make that decision too, by withholding, you better move out. Al-Anons have a lot of power. They have a lot of power. That's why it's very difficult for Al-Anons to surrender. And but anyway, to put up that white flag and say, okay, I surrender. It's either my way or the highway. And I was always the one taking the highway. And always threatening to leave. I'm leaving you, Bob. Packing up my stuff and leaving. And then I get down the telephone booth and I call him, I've left. Alcoholic's great. Goodbye. Don't let the door hit you in the ass. I disrupted his drinking. One night, especially with the restaurant, we closed it up. Bob, of course, disappears, so I know he's in the blackout bar. So in Harrah's, they had a blackout bar. Can you believe it? They called it a blackout bar. And I wore high heels and, really sexy clothes and all that kind of stuff. And I can remember, going over to Harrah's, and I worked for Harrah's in the entertainment business. In the entertainment. So, everybody knew me at Harrah's. I almost married Bill Harrah. I wish I would have married him anyway, because he died and left her a lot of money. And he liked me too. But anyway, so another one of my 5 steps. But anyway, so I remember going down the steps. You have to go down these steps and into this blackout bar. I swear to God, as black as her sweatshirt. It was so black in there, and smoke. Everybody smoked at the time and all this kind of. And I'm in my high heels and, my Donna Karan outfit and all this, and skinny. Of course, you're skinny. You're smoking all the time and drinking that coffee to keep you up. God, if they had Red Bull, I'd had a heart attack. Anyway, and I remember going in that bar, and I, found him through the Menon shaving spice or whatever, and I finally found him, and I'm dragging him out of that bar. I'm physically dragging him. Now, I understand Ambi. I'm physically dragging him out of the bar, and all of a sudden I look at him, and it's not Bob. I'm like, who in the hell are you? And he goes, who in the hell are you? And we started talking, and he could have been part of my 5th step. And but I was on a mission, not like the mission that we're on today. Not on the spiritual mission or the spiritual path or trudging that road, or as Al-Anon says, that sense of, being part of, the sense of doing something that's bigger than ourselves, But I had a lot of other incidences, which I'll talk about during the day because I don't have time to talk about them now. But I want to set you up. Sharon set you up last night for the basis of the principles and the principles of our steps, of our lives, through our stories, through our experience and our strength and our hope. Because, you have to be a strong woman and be able to be an alcoholic and to live with alcoholism. And as an alcoholic woman, to be able to make amends to your family or to make amends, financial amends, to do those things. Al-Anons have to do that too. That humiliation is for us also. You lead the way to us. You lead that example to us. But anyway, another horrible incident has happened. Sharon talks about the ripple. We talk about an Al-Anon in our piece of literature. It's called The Pebble in the Pond. She talks about the Zen rock. Wherever she goes, she has her Zen rock. She talks about the strength of that. We talk about the pebble, because Al-Anon start off with a little pebble. It's more denial for us. it's harder for us to admit that we are powerless. It's harder for us, I think, to believe what it says in the 5th chapter of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is for us to read, to learn about alcoholism. Talks about no human power. Those 13 months, I felt that I had the human power, physically, mentally, and spiritually, to change his life because I loved him so much. I sacrificed my children's lives for him and for them. I sacrificed at that restaurant, being over-responsible, running that restaurant, running those waiters, berating my, college bartender, who was working his way through medical school, berated him, do not serve him another drink, I'll fire you. And then Bob would come right behind and said, if you don't serve me a drink, I'll fire you. No, he wouldn't. He'd never fire him. They always leave it up to the Al-Anons. The amends that I had to make, which we'll talk about today. The amends that I had to make, the lists that I had to make. And then the humiliation one night of leaving my little daughter Ambi home alone while I take the babysitter home in the middle of the night. And I can't wait for that stoplight to turn. Because, man, I want to get back to the house, call that restaurant, make him come home. And all of a sudden I go through that light and I get picked up by the local Reno police. And I'm arguing with him. I'm fighting with him. They're all down at my restaurant, all drunk. They didn't know what to do with me. I called him, a bad word during the 70s. Called F-pig or something. And they didn't like that. He didn't like that. They didn't know what to do with me, so they took me to jail. They threw me in a padded cell. They gave me one call before they threw me in the padded cell. They threw me in there for being insane in step 2. They didn't throw me in there because I was sane. I did the same thing the alcoholic did. I just did it sober and crazy. And the humiliation of calling Bob and saying, Mac, the bail bondsman's down at the restaurant drinking. You have to come get me. He goes, where are you? I said, I'm in jail. And he goes, you know what, BettyAnn? You figure everything else out. Figure this out. Hung up the phone. Many years later, when I picked up that phone, after my little twin daughter died of SIDS, I called my father. And I said, Dad, this baby has died. And she died from SIDS. My father was drunk and said, you killed that baby. And I can remember handing the phone to my husband. I had to surrender. I handed that phone to my husband. And I said, as an alcoholic, Bob, you need to take care of this. And my husband did. It's all about that surrender. Our lives got really interesting after that. And I'll talk about more of that in stories later. I've got to end, just a few minutes here. And I want to talk to you this afternoon about my kids and about Sharon and I want to talk to you about the principles of what we stand by, with our families. Talk about recovery this afternoon. We're going to talk about that. And I'll talk about a lot of things that happened between then, but I'm going to leave this story with right now is that I have 5 children. After Bob and I were married, and after Bob, I forced her to make that free decision, and what we went through in Reno with AA and Al-Anon. Al-Anon saved my life in Reno. There was, they only had 2 meetings in Reno at that time. They had like 3 pieces of literature in the One Day at a Time book. And I was invited to go to open AA meetings. My sponsor told me, she said, you need to go to open AA meetings. And I did that. But I can remember that first meeting that Bob and I went to, and I don't want to ever forget it, at the VA hospital. And we're working at the restaurant, and I persuaded him because he had a bad night. His last drunk was on a Friday night. And And that last drunk, I'd called that morning Al-Anon because he hadn't gotten home yet, Reno being a 24-hour town. And I said something that the alcoholic says when they're surrendered and they're in desperation. I called that Al-Anon number, and I can remember that it was the hardest number to call. They say pick up the 500-pound pin or pick up the 500-pound phone. And there's a lady that answered the phone, no answering service, no recordings, answered the phone, says, "Hi, I'm Mickey, and I'm a member of Al-Anon. How can I help you? What can I do for you?" I talked to her for 2 hours and told her my sad story. And you know what? That sad story ended up in a number of years later, that lady left the program, and her and her husband, they found another higher power that was more powerful than AA and Al-Anon. Never heard from them again. And he died of alcoholism, her husband. They invited me to that meeting. I took my husband to the meeting, and Sunday night, the VA hospital, and they were all shuffling around their VA robes and their Thorazine. But they said there were some Al-Anons there. And, we have that little radar. She goes, "You got to talk to this guy named Gino and this guy named Bill. They're in Al-Anon." A guy? So I went to those after the meeting, and it's like welcome home. I thought, this is very interesting. They invited me to the meeting on Monday night, and they said, "Bob, there's an AA meeting there. Thank God for Al-Anon and AA and Alateen having meetings at the same time." It's terrible in Los Angeles not to have an AA meeting that's close by, especially for Al-Anons to be able to send their loved ones to. But anyway, I went to my first Al-Anon meeting. It was out on the porch of this Dryers Club, it's called. My husband went into the back room, I made sure. And in the back room was, they had a meeting. My husband came out in his Brooks Brothers suit. After the meeting, he goes, "I'm never going back to that meeting. I'm never going back to AA." And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Guess what the meeting was called?" I said, "What?" He goes, "Puke on the Shoes Group." But I made sure he went. And but my life really changed that night, because that night, I don't want to ever forget that first meeting. And they were sitting around the pool table with the plywood board on top and the light bulb hanging down, and on the couches. And I thought, God, these couches are all ripped up. They got cigarette, burns in them, and this is a mess. And we're out here on the porch. We're freezing to death, snowing outside. Found out later, well, they did 12-step calls there. They saved alcoholics' lives on those couches. They'd bring them off the street and give them tea and honey and put, popsicle sticks, and so they would convulse. But I've had the privilege of being out on 12-step calls with my husband. They'd call up in the middle of the night, and Tokay Red would call. And he'd say, "Bob, bring your wife. She can talk to the family." I had the privilege of doing that. And especially in the middle of the night when I was pregnant with my son, JR, who I'm going to go visit, who lives in alcoholism. My little grandchildren are affected by that, the next generation. We'll talk more about that tonight. I gotta clean this up, because I have the privilege of being with you throughout the day and tomorrow. Anyway, what happened for me in that first meeting, I had a spiritual experience, and not only that, I had a spiritual awakening. And it came before the meeting ended. And they were all sitting around, they were all laughing and carrying on when I got there. But they're all sitting around that meeting. And they started with the serenity prayer, and then they had a subject, whatever. And I couldn't wait to the end, because they said newcomers can ask questions or make comments. And of course, I asked the question, how can I get him to stop drinking or whatever? And they said, well, he's in the other room, right? Then I asked, do I have to stop drinking? And this old guy, Bill, God rest his soul, God love him though, he looked at me and he said, if you can't stop drinking, he said, you need to be in the other room. I didn't like him. But one night when Bob refused to go to a meeting, and I didn't have a ride home from a meeting, he was the only game in town. And I had to reach out. And I remember reaching out to Bill. I said, Bill, can you give me a ride back to the restaurant? He said, I'd love to do that. And he took me back to the restaurant and sat out in the parking lot with me for 2 hours and shared with me about alcoholism, about Al-Anonism. So there's a lot of gifts here. I haven't had time to talk about all my kids. I don't know why I had them, but anyway, we'll talk about that during the day, and we'll talk about that surrender. But again, I want to thank all of you, but I really want to thank Deb and Ning for, trusting the fact that I was really the sixth person. But, and it's a privilege, Ning, to be with you. And I'll tell you the rest of the story during the weekend. But you've come too, and you're part of this. And please be part of it. I know it's fearful. It's fearful to be around women. And it's fearful to be, our ego. But like she said last night, we have to breathe. Just breathe in. Breathe in. Talk to each other. It says in Al-Anon, reason things out. Let there be no gossip or criticism. Be with each other this weekend. Put down your sticks, your weapons. Yeah. She's got us on a tight schedule, so I'm going to end with that. I hope that during the weekend that Sharon and I know Sharon will. I trust her, and that we will be able to get through this. But I want to end with this prayer that I put on my Al-Anon card that Keith Carpenter gave us, my sponsor's husband gave me, and I put it on my Al-Anon card. And it says, Dear God, help me to accept the seemingly bad as well as the good which is necessary for my growth. The seemingly bad things that we're going to share about or talk about this weekend has only been for my growth, and then to be able to have the privilege of being here at Heart to Heart to be with you this year. Thank you.